Thank you all for being here in this incredibly memorable room. We're very happy tonight. Thanks for being here on this very special occasion, our induction of Professor Beverley Diamond as the newest honorary member of the Society for American Music. A brilliant researcher, a dedicated teacher, a sought-after collaborator, and an admired mentor, Professor Diamond is one of the leading voices in ethnomusicology in Canada and on the international scene. She's especially known for her research on Indigenous music cultures, Canadian music and historiography, music and place, and music and gender, and the impact of her work can be felt deeply at this conference, gauged by numerous panels and papers written in her honor, scholars influenced by her research, and students past and present who have worked closely with her. She's now Professor Emeritus at Memorial University of Newfoundland, where she was the first Canada Research Chair in ethnomusicology and where she established and directed the Research Center for the Study of Music, Media, and Place. At this point in the proceedings, I've asked Professor Robin Elliott to introduce Professor Diamond. Professor Elliott holds the Jean A. Chalmers Chair in Canadian Music at the University of Toronto, where he also serves as the director of the Institute for Canadian Music. Professor Elliott has published 10 edited books and volumes of music, as well as more than 30 articles and other publications in the field of Canadian music studies. Many of you heard his remarks at this afternoon's roundtable, and I'm extremely pleased that he could join us for this evening's event. So please join me in welcoming Professor Robin Elliott.
I'd like to thank Charles Hiroshi Garrett, the president of the Society for American Music, for inviting me to say a few words in appreciation of Beverley Diamond on the occasion of her being named an honorary member of the Society for American Music. Bev is the third Canadian musician to earn this distinction. The first was the late great Montreal-born jazz pianist Oscar Peterson in 2000, and the second was the composer R. Murray Schafer in 2010. Having honored an outstanding Canadian performer and composer to date, it is wonderfully fitting that with this recognition for Bev, Sam honors an outstanding Canadian music scholar. I've known Bev for over 40 years, ever since my undergraduate studies at Queen's University in Kingston. I was in my second year of the BMUS program when she was appointed as an assistant professor in 1975. I've followed her career with intense interest in the intervening decades and had the pleasure of co-editing with Gordon Smith a festschrift in her honor titled Music Traditions, Cultures, and Contexts that was published in 2010. Bev possesses in abundance the diverse skills that are characteristic of the finest music scholars. Her training in Western classical music was at the highest level. She is an exceptionally fine pianist and has performed professionally in that capacity, notably with wind song, soprano, flute, and piano trio, which was often heard on CBC radio. She's a lively and creative thinker, adept at synthesizing key concepts and ideas from various intellectual traditions and putting them to work in the service of enhancing our understanding of music and its place in diverse contemporary and historical societies. She commands an enormous vocabulary of specialized technical language pertaining to theoretical knowledge about a wide range of musical traditions from around the world. But she also has a gift for avoiding jargon and writing in an accessible, engaging manner. Rather than building fences around her scholarly work, her writing style invites the reader in. From the time of her University of Toronto doctoral thesis on Inuit music in 1979, up to her most recent publications, Bev's research has focused on the diverse musical traditions of the First Peoples in Canada. A circumpolar focus in her research interests opened up in more recent years when she began to study the music of the Sami people of Scandinavia. The subject matter of her research ranges widely from traditional music cultures to pop idioms and from organological studies to copyright issues. Her work examines the diverse intersections between music and society, including music and gender, musical instruments as cultural metaphor, and the historiography of Canadian music, among other topics. Concentrating on manifestations of Indigenous modernity, her recent work has explored the role and impact of digital media on the preservation, transmission, and reception of Indigenous music and culture. One of the central themes running through Bev's career is her passion for working with Indigenous elders and culture bearers. She has helped to reposition fieldwork from the old model of mining Aboriginal communities for cultural artifacts to be taken away and studied, to a new paradigm of collaborative partnership in which the agency, intellectual traditions, and knowledge systems of First Peoples is given full credit. Her work with Inuit, Métis, and First Nations culture bearers has been exemplary in this regard, both ethically and intellectually. Her collaborative partnerships with artists such as the Haudenosaunee musician Sadie Buck and the Inuit throat singer Karen Kettler, among many others, has set new standards for intercultural dialogue. As she stated herself in the introduction to the book Aboriginal Music in Contemporary Canada, which she co-edited with Anna Hofnagels in 2012, quote, "Engaged scholarship has become a shared obligation and an exciting pathway," unquote. It has been Bev who has led us down that fruitful and exciting pathway of socially responsible scholarship, which aims to bring benefits to all who participate in the sharing of discoveries. The first step towards establishing a new model of socially responsible and mutually beneficial partnerships between First Peoples in Canada and the scholarly community were taken with the SSHRC-funded Sound Producing Instruments in Native Communities project, or SPIN, which was based at Queen's University in the late 1980s. That project, as evidenced by the book which resulted from it, Visions of Sound in 1994, placed Bev and her two co-investigators, Sam Kronk and Franziska von Rosen, who were both undergraduate students at Queen's University at the time, in dialogue with each other and with members of various First Nations communities. It was an important step towards enabling and improving cross-cultural dialogue and understanding. In the SPINC project and the many other academic projects and conferences that she has initiated since then, Bev has sought out ways to connect the culture and experiences of the First Peoples in Canada with the concerns of Indigenous populations elsewhere in the world, and also with research in other areas of ethnomusicology and cultural studies. Her close working partnerships with scholars and musicians from the United States, Europe, and Australia have helped to make Canadian music and scholarship about it much better known to the international community. I note in this connection that when Gordon and I co-edited the Festschrift in her honor, we had no trouble soliciting contributions from some of the world's leading ethnomusicologists who were eager to join in honoring her work and career in this way. Her contributions to the leading international organizations for music scholarship, including the Society for Ethnomusicology, of which she was the president from 2013 to 2015, and the International Council for Traditional Music, in addition to the Society for American Music, arise out of the same impetus to place Canadian music and scholarship prominently on the international stage. As an aspiring mentor to younger scholars, Bev has no peer among university music professors in Canada. The major SSHRC-funded projects which she has spearheaded, SPINC, Canadian Musical Pathways, and those associated with the Research Centre for the Study of Music, Media and Place, or MMAP, which she founded in 2003 at Memorial University, have involved extensive input from and training for students at all levels, from undergraduates to postgraduates. She is a wise and humane advisor, an articulate and forceful champion of her students' work, an enabler of scholarship, and a creator of scholarly connections and communities. From coast to coast in Canada, and in many places abroad, there is a network of her former pupils who are united by their love and admiration of her work and have benefited from her mentorship and advocacy. One of her many great talents is for creating welcoming communities and shared spaces in which diverse stakeholders from within academia and beyond feel empowered to share their ideas with the world at large. This generosity of spirit makes her a truly transformative presence in contemporary music scholarship. The ability to foster a positive and compassionate attitude, both in individual students and in scholarly groups and communities, is one thing that sets Bev apart as an academic mentor. In 2003, she moved from York University to Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland, as the first music scholar to hold a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair. At Memorial, she set up an important new graduate program in ethnomusicology, established MMAP, and became closely involved with the musical and scholarly communities of Newfoundland and Labrador, all while maintaining her prominent national and international profile as a music scholar. She attracted external funding from national and international agencies, issued recordings of Newfoundland and Labrador music together with extensive written documentation, and was involved with numerous publication projects and conferences. In the course of her career, she has attracted, either by herself or as a member of various collaborative projects, over $10 million in research funds. She has been and continues to be instrumental in the development of institutional frameworks for music research in Canada and internationally. In all that she has done, she has worked hard to ensure that music research is not only an enjoyable and exciting academic pursuit, but also a socially relevant force for positive change in the world. Academic honors and awards in abundance have been bestowed upon Bev, and rightfully so. On the strength of her publications, her mentoring of young scholars, her exceptional record in attracting research funding, the important research projects that she has spearheaded, her inspired work building bridges between academia and the wider world, and her unstinting efforts to make Canadian music and scholarship about it better known nationally and internationally, Beverley Diamond is truly a superlative and inspiring scholar and an exemplary role model. She has been a visiting professor at Harvard University and a Trudeau Fellow, and she is a member of the Order of Canada and of the Royal Society of Canada. In 2014, she was awarded the Gold Medal by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, their highest honor, in recognition of the quality and impact of her work. As the most important scholar of Canadian music, and one whose work is not only absolutely indispensable to the field, but has also put Canadian music studies on the map internationally, she is eminently deserving of joining the distinguished list of honorary members of the Society for American Music. Please join me in congratulating Bev on this signal honor.
By the excess of kind words and attention. Of course, I want to thank the Society for American Music for this fantastic honor. And I want to thank the ever-brilliant and generous Robin Elliott for his very kind words. I think he deserves this honor more than I. And the panel that preceded this that some of you heard, that truly was quite overwhelming. I heard my name said far too many times in an hour and a half. But I thank you, my dear colleagues and friends, for your sharp insights about new directions and imagined futures. I think that's really productive. And I would like to say that the one thing I have had in life is the enormous luck to have had just incredibly brilliant and generous friends and colleagues and students, and I've learned from you all, of course. I also would like to acknowledge, I don't think he's here, but I think he might be in town. I'd like to acknowledge one of my truly important teachers, John Beckwith, who played a key role for my generation in validating research that fell outside the borders of the European classical canon. I think I might not have had the direction I took without him. He just turned 90 years of age, and you can hear a concert tonight with one of his pieces if you go up to the McGill campus. And I think Robin has told me he might be there tonight, so that would be wonderful. Okay, so I have about 6 or 7 minutes of comments here because I was told that I had your ear for that long. In the prologue to his latest book, entitled Returns, James Clifford wrote, "I have come to feel historical." I can relate. Of course, one can feel historical on various levels. The most personal level for me these days is intergenerational change. And my stories aren't very unusual or very amazing, but I'd like to just tell them to you anyway. I'm fascinated with the question of how young children embody music, and I think this is a research area that I'd love to see people in the Society for American Music pursue at some point. In my childhood, for instance, piano playing was predictably a middle-class aspiration, but playing by ear was curiously taboo. When I tried to imitate the elementary pieces my older brother was learning, my parents, concerned that I might cultivate this dangerous habit of playing by ear, started giving me music lessons at a very young age. I became eager to devour book after book of elementary piano pieces, and that love of reading repertoire remains an important part of my life. I think it informs my scholarship as well. For my 5-year-old granddaughter, on the other hand, music results when you push the button on her Disney microphone. She doesn't even sing along too much, not yet, but develops a big range of dance styles. She may become a brilliant dancer, who knows. Of course, both our experiences are gendered. In my case, the confining of young women to given texts rather than the wild options of improvisation and playing by ear. In my granddaughter's case, the commercial control of the texts of popular music and the sexualized styles of movement that a 5-year-old already has seen so often that they come very naturally to her. So I tell you that story because, of course, I do think about how this might inform the kinds of scholarship we've not done yet. But on a broader social level for me, feeling historical is often related to the enormous shifts, particularly in Indigenous studies. The shifts, of course, relate to decolonization, making many of us aware of the colonial assumptions that tinge many well-motivated scholarly enterprises, including my own. For instance, during my earliest research in Inuit communities in the Canadian Arctic, I became aware, but not yet enraged, by the poor government housing, the minimal health services, and the stories of residential schools. Stories about children who returned home without the ability to communicate in their own language with their parents and grandparents. The stories of physical, sexual, and psychological abuse that have emerged more recently were not, at that time, shared with outsiders. Silence is also something we need to pay attention to. At the time, though, I did not recognize that federal funding for Arctic research, including my own, often related to Arctic sovereignty, just as the relocations of Inuit to remote areas, which they didn't want to go to, were engineered in order to claim sovereignty in the name of Canada. Those of us who felt we were somehow making the invisible visible by recording, writing about, sometimes transcribing music, were blind to the ways that this work, intended to decenter, perhaps even to decolonize, was arguably recolonizing by translating, by speaking for, by trying to define patterns through objective analysis. In the 1980s, I formed a team that Robin has referred to, a team to do an organological project because so many early evolutionary studies and even late 20th century textbooks offered dismissive representations of Inuit and First Nations music as just drums and rattles. Our project was also congruent with the desire of some Indigenous advisors to learn more about artifacts that were imprisoned in museums and archives. The wide range of technologies, artistry, and sonic nuance evidence in the more than 700 artifacts in 25 museum collections that my research team studied purposefully belied such simplifications, visually and sonically. Some instruments were gifts of the natural world, requiring no modifications, gourds or seed pods that produced the sounds of creation when seeds dried. Others were complex assemblages of meaningful material elements with qualities, colors, or sounds needed for medicinal or other purposes. Many were exquisitely crafted artistic productions, from the intricate carved drumsticks of the Haudenosaunee that had actually sound producers carved into the middle of the drumstick, to an Anishinaabe shaker that sounded differently when the handle was turned in each of the 4 directions. These unique creations connect the materiality of sound to environments and lives and taught me about the artificiality of a nature-culture divide. Our study felt more enlightened, but was it? In retrospect, it failed to grapple seriously with the museum enterprise, to name one of its shortcomings. More recently, and this is my last example, I'll stop reminiscing soon. My work, like that of many ethnomusicological colleagues, has shifted to contemporary music in a variety of popular, classical, and mixed genres. My motivation to recognize the way present-day Indigenous artists are re-articulating history, drawing attention to violence and other social problems, and conveying Indigenous values and perspectives. This work feels engaged at many levels, and it's easier to discuss different perspectives about collaboration, stylistic borrowings, appropriation, or many other topics that are of concern to both Indigenous and non-Indigenous interlocutors. But I wonder if we have drawn attention away from those impoverished remote communities that still don't have adequate housing, adequate health services, equal education, etc., by essentially turning our attention to the Indigenous middle class. Well, enough self-reflection. In conclusion, I would like to pose a final question to you. What does it mean for the Society for American Music to feel historical in an age of globalization, digital media, and decolonization? What does it mean to name a country, if that's what you think of as American music, or a continent, if that's what you think of as American music? I won't presume to answer, but to consider a little bit the constituent that is Canada in relation to the United States. There's been some other comments made about that earlier today. 10 years ago, I wrote that due to the multi-party system of our government, there was at that time a party in government intent on breaking up the country, to the divergent histories and culture of English and French, as well as the specific policies of multiculturalism and the sharp debates about all those things, due, I think, to the higher visibility of Indigenous culture and the sharp debates about those representations, I argue that Canadians are perhaps more comfortable than Americans with what I call the fragility of consensus. We were telling small stories that were by no means going to set the world on fire at a point where Americans were defining the icons of what American music in the United States was about, defining things of great historical importance for the world. So there was quite a difference, I think, in the scope of our studies and really in the politics that informed that scope. Now, the Trump era may have recast that statement about the fragility of consensus for both people in both countries. But I wonder, however, when much discussion of borders is in the news, if the Society for American Music will begin to focus more on border crossing. Will this society embrace American music as transcontinental and multinational, with a greater presence from Mexico and the countries of South America? I suppose only our academic grandchildren, when they begin to feel historical, will be able to answer my questions. But to return briefly to James Clifford, I have never felt, as he sometimes did, that feeling historical can be like a rug pulled out. We are in a moment that can generate new ways of seeing the world and putting existing ones in productive dialogue, and I look forward to that. Thank you so much for this amazing honor.
Remaining a teacher of music, of ethics, of the kind of things that I think we're all thinking about these days, and also the kinds of things that come to the fore when the Society for American Music meets in a place like Montreal. So thank you for that. I'd like to officially present the Honorary Member Award. The Society for American Music is delighted to grant honorary membership to Dr. Beverley Diamond. The citation in this packet here recognizes, and I quote, "Your pioneering scholarship on Indigenous music cultures, Canadian music, gender, and place, and your inspirational work as a teacher and leader in the field of ethnomusicology." Let's once again congratulate Beverley Diamond. Thank you all for being here, helping to make this a great occasion. I invite you to join us for the reception just outside and a little bit past the elevators, where you'll have a chance to greet Professor Diamond in person. I also want to remind you that the buses for the events that are happening in McGill, both the concert and the Sacred Harp Sing, leave from the lobby at around 6:30. And thank you again for being here. We really appreciate it.
Robin.